Hey folks, Chuck Black here. I am doing an addendum to week 32 discussion, which was on nmap. What is an addendum, you say? Well, I have absolutely no idea, but it sounded like a good thing to say, so it sounds like it's something that you add at the end. Get it? Addendum. And it turns out, when I looked it up, that's a little bit what it is. So an addendum, an item of additional material. That's what we're talking about here. So this is an addendum, and if you will recall from our discussion, I mentioned, but I didn't go down into this thing right here. Now, this is something that I had seen online as a description of things to do with nmap, and so I did that, and it worked fine, and I wrote this code a couple of months ago. In fact, here's a tip for you. If you're in PyCharm, you can go over here and you can annotate stuff, and you can see, oh, well, I can tell exactly when I last committed that line of code. It was back in September. So you can see that, so that's an interesting thing to do. If you're in a project, you'll do that with a bunch of other people. You'll do that all the time, so you can see who modified code. And it's they say they use git blame. That's a word that we use to figure out, all right, who did something here that might have caused it to break. But I digress. I wrote it many months ago, and it's been sitting here waiting for me to record something on it. And when I did, I came in and I said, wait just a doggone minute here. Now that nm thing, what is it? It's actually an object. Well, now in Python, everything is an object, as you know, but it's like a class object. I've started to call things that. That means that there's a class called port scanner, and this is an instance of it, an object instance of it. And how do you refer to things that are object instances? Well, you refer to them typically with dot notation. Let's peek ahead here. You can see I have nm dot, and then I'm referring to a piece of data. Don't look at this too much. We're going to go into this in a minute, but that's how you normally do things. And so I looked at this, which is what I was looking at yesterday. This here is what I wrote this morning. I looked here and I said, well, why is it doing that, and what is it doing? And I spent a little bit of time before our lesson recording yesterday trying to figure out what it was doing. I didn't get any joy, so I went ahead and recorded it and said, well, this is something that I'll look into, but this is what it's doing. And so I looked into that, and it actually turned out to be a fairly hard nut to crack. Normally, with a few Googles, you can find out what's going on, but I didn't really actually find anything directly after almost a half hour or so of Googling and searching and reading and stuff. But then I got something that directed me, and I'm not sure what it was. It was probably an indirect reference to something, and I began to wonder if this was what it might be. And it turns out that's exactly what it is. I still don't have any Stack Overflow articles that describe this. But let me tell you what's happening. Now, what is happening is that with something that has been added to Python, and I am searching for it here, we're going to go down and I'm going to go to get item. You can define a method inside your, let me get rid of this so you can see it, inside your class called get item underscore underscore get item underscore underscore. The underscores are an indication. It's not enforced, but it's an indication that this is an internal routine that does something special, kind of like a init that we've seen in various places. And when we get to class-oriented stuff, we'll see more of it. But look at this. What this does, if you specify, if the code calls into this thing called get item, then what's going to happen is it's going to return this thing right here. And what I realized when I looked at the output from the code, that is actually the location where this scan output is coming from. This data right here is actually what you find inside this nmap port scanner object. That is exactly what is that is actually what we're looking at when we get the data back. So when we do this, what that is telling us is it's giving us this scan output result. And so what's happening when we have this dereferencing or this referencing of something in brackets here, so this is like a subscript or a key. In our case, it's a key. When we pass in the key like this, what's going to happen is via Python magic, it's going to come down here to get item. It's passing in the host, that's my IP address, and it is going to actually return self._scan result with the key of scan and a further key of the host, which in my case is an IP address. If I scroll up to towards the top of this function, then you can see the different pieces of data that are described or defined inside our port scanner class. This is port scanner right here that we're looking at, and there's something called scan result, and it's a dictionary. And when we looked at get item, we saw that it was returning the actual data for that one particular host. So it's returning this data. So what I did was I said, well, let's write some code that will figure this out, because I have to run it in. I would rather do the debugger, but I can't because I have to run as root, and it's a pain in the neck to do that with PyCharm. So what I did instead was I took the output, the scan output that I got from this nm with a key of IP. Scan output 1 is that value, and I said scan output 2 is the actual, I'm referencing by hand the exact same thing, nm._scan result, key of scan with within that dictionary the key of the host's IP address. And remember, when I go down here and I'm going to do my get item again, __ get item, when I go into this get item, you'll notice this looks exactly the same as what I'm looking at here. In fact, let me do it side by side so that you can see it. So what I'm doing right here, that data that I'm referencing inside my nm port scanner object, that is exactly the same as this, _scan result, scan host, _scan result, scan IP. IP is what I'm passing in that it's calling host in here, but I called it IP in here. And so I do this comparison, and sure enough, when I run this and I look at the output, which is down here towards the bottom, I print out whether the comparison was true or not. And that's what I do with this line of code right here, where I'm using an F string, scan output reference comparison, and I'm doing this actual comparison. Scan output 1 is equal to scan output 2. And as we just saw, the result of that is indeed true. So just to summarize, when I saw something like this, I didn't understand what it was doing. It took me a while to figure out what it was. I haven't run into many situations like this in my life, in my Python life anyway. And so I looked it up. I eventually determined that it has to do with this get item function, which typically is used for getting stuff out of, for controlling access to data within the class. And in this case, it's being used a little bit differently. It's being used in order to allow us to reference it in this simple and, I guess you could say, straightforward, easy way. We can look at it and understand what it's doing. When you put your Python hat on it, as I did as I was doing the class, then you begin to say, wait a minute, what is that actually doing? And now we know it's calling into get item, and it is returning us scan result with the key of scan and with the further key in there of the IP address. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of understanding of what happened here. Like I say, this has been rare for me. Most everything is pretty easy to understand in Python, but you will encounter this as you get to the intermediate and your advanced stages of Python. Should you choose to go that route, then you will probably encounter more and more of this, because people tend in the programming world to find something like this and they begin to use it. It's like a secret language that other people don't know. And it really, in this case, it did make it more easy to reference stuff. So I'm not completely dissing this method for doing stuff. It certainly looks way less messy than this does. And so from that perspective, it's good and it's clean and it's concise. But you will run into periodically things like this. I guess another thing in this category would be something like a list comprehension. That when you first see it is hard to understand. Once you do understand it, then it begins to become second nature for you. So hopefully this description helped you out. Hopefully it also wasn't too long or boring and you get the general idea. If you're a new person and you've stuck with it this whole time, then congratulations and kudos to you. And you don't really need to know this too much, but the rest of you, you may want to become aware of this as I became aware of it last night and explained it today. Hopefully this is useful. Thanks for listening.